Hey guys, welcome back. This is a what if of Luffy eating the Hito no Mi, model Asura, instead of the Gomu no Mi. The family of D is scattered around the world. Names have ascended from their clan to be legendary and hold power throughout time. But what if someone of the head family were to unite them and bring them from the shadows? What if it was time to show the world that they're still strong by their name and clan? This is an OP, wild, smarter, different DF Luffy. Harem and crossover elements. Before we start, only 23.1% of people who watches these videos are actually subscribed, so please hit the subscribe button and turn on post notifications so you will never miss a video. Now let's start this part. Chapter 5, A Failed Plan, Memories of the Past, and a Finished Ship. After a good night's sleep, Luffy was the first to get up at 5 a.m., shower, brush his teeth and get dressed. Last night the Mercury clone Luffy sent to retrieve his other belongings had returned with the money and whatever else was hidden on the island. Instead of keeping the money out in the open, he put it somewhere where no one would look for the time being. So now they didn't have to make stops unless getting other crew members. So now, Luffy was walking for a while along the cliffs looking over the shore but decided to sit down and focus on his breathing. For the next hour he would go uninterrupted until he heard voices coming down from the shore beneath him. So he crouched and got close to see and listen, so when he peeked and saw Klahadore with another strange-looking man, he decided to listen. "Have all the preparations been made, Django?" asks Klahadore as he pushed his glasses up. The man now known as Django took a seat on a nearby rock before he spoke to Klahadore. "Yes sir, all the necessary preparations are in place, everything will go according to plan as you said, Captain Koro," says Django, causing Luffy to remember who this man is and now get a grin and satisfaction of finally knowing who this butler's true identity was. "So, that's why you're familiar, the sword program was supposed to hunt him but he barely escaped with his life," thought Luffy as he watched them. "Captain Koro or Kuro of 1,000 plans. Looks like I'll be able to do something while we wait for the ship to get finished and to expose this bastard for the snake he is," thought Luffy, but he was brought out of his thoughts when Koro shouted in anger at Django. "Don't call me that name, idiot," says Koro yelling. "I gave up that name a long time ago, it only caused problems, especially that bastard who wore the monkey mask in the umbu," says Kuro, adjusting his glasses once again as Luffy got a grin because he still had the mask. Django sighed a bit and stood up to speak again. "Fine, just hurry up and give us the signal so we can kill this girl and get the money. While we're at it we should raid the town on this island as well," says Django, still keeping the same attitude. Luffy could see the anger in Koro's eyes and smell the scent of anger as well when Django said that. "You fool, I can't kill her to get the inheritance money because we're not related," says Koro, trying to keep his calm despite his subordinate's comments. "Miss Kaya needs to pass in an unfortunate accident, but before that unfortunate accident can occur, I'll need you to hypnotize her and make her write out a will that leaves all of her fortune to her loyal butler, Klahadore. As for the town, we leave it alone," says Koro with a pompous grin on his face. "Right, just hurry up and give us the signal, the crew is getting restless," says Django, informing his captain. Koro looked at Django for a moment before he spoke again. "There's something that has come up that may be a hindrance to our plan," says Koro, getting Django's full attention. "There is a boy with 2 others currently here in the village with a straw hat. I want you to avoid him at all cost," says Koro, which surprises Django. "Why? Is he a problem?" asks Django. Koro looked at him with a serious but a bit frightened expression as he spoke again. "He's a former agent of the world government, but he has ties to one of the 4 emperors of the New World," says Koro, making Django's eyes widen. "I have a suspicion that he may be the one that tried to kill me years ago, but the appearance of him is all off. I doubt he'll get involved after all, I doubt he could match me even if he is a pirate. However, if he does I will deal with him," says Koro as he turned to leave. "So he believes he can match me in speed, huh?" thought Luffy. Django left as well, but not before informing his captain of something. "The crew and I will be on the north shore at daybreak. They'll probably want to storm the village as well, so we should let them," says Django. Koro didn't bother replying to what he said, so he simply just walked away. Luffy, for his part, got up and disappeared in crimson flames to get back on the road. Back on the road. "It's better if I inform the others of this now," thought Luffy as he started walking back. After walking for 10 minutes or so, he arrived back at the inn and saw that both Zoro and Nami were up and Usopp was there already, which made things easier for him. Luffy then decided to tell them what he heard along with who Klahadore really was, making Usopp dash out of the inn in speed to warn Kaya. Luffy saw this and sighed as he spoke. "Well, that won't turn out well, he's gonna be heartbroken, but it was to be expected," says Luffy. As he goes through his bag for something and Nami looks over at him, confused. "What do you mean?" asks Nami with a confused look on her face. Luffy looked upside and spoke once more. "I went around the village and heard of Usopp's reputation. He's famous around here for being a liar. He's about to tell Kaya that the man who takes care of her is a pirate, so what do you think she'll believe, asks Luffy as he pulls out his onyx black mask with red markings. The mask is overall onyx black monkey mask with blood red markings. Zoro looked over and noticed it as it brought back memories. Is that? Says Zoro shocked. Yeah, figured I keep it. Now that I can finally finish off my final appearance, says Luffy as he left into the bathroom to get change into his clothes and gear now. After 10 minutes or so, Luffy came out now wearing a purple and black patterned haori for which the sleeves went a bit over his wrists. But on the left shoulder is his mask that he strapped there as an accessory. He'll usually put the mask on the side of his head when he takes off his hat for a bit. Everything beneath his waist is the same. He still wears his Hanafuda earrings, necklaces, and tessellated headband and the ring he wears on his right ring finger. The one other change is the second katana on his waist with his first, as on his left hip was a Walker .36 caliber percussion revolver that he stole from a Yonko's crew and had it redesigned for regular bullets and devil fruit powers, with the weapon being overall black but had red flames on it with red on the metal pieces. So Luffy just sat down and waited and enjoyed the silence, but Nami decided to ask a question. Aren't we gonna do something about all this? Asks Nami. Yes, we will, but we'll wait for Usopp to get back considering he'll be back, says Luffy. So what are going to do, Captain? Asks Zoro as he waited for Luffy to respond. I owe a debt of eternal gratitude to Shanks and his crew that I'll never be able to repay. So that being said, either way we're gonna handle this guy. I won't allow him to chaos on this island, especially when Yasopp's wife is buried here, says Luffy, which makes Zoro nod and smirk and Nami become fearful. So while they waited for Usopp to return, the crew had spent the rest of the day either planning or preparing for the coming battle. Usopp returned later, heartbroken as Luffy said. So he decided to join them in defeating this pirate group. The next morning, the day had arrived for when this pirate crew would be there. Luffy and the others got up before daybreak and made their way to the north shore to wait for the pirates. The group stood at their spots on top of the slope, leading up from the shore. Luffy stood there calmly preparing, as he prepared himself for the battle ahead, while Nami and Usopp were unsure of being there and Zoro looked excited. Luffy could smell the fear coming off Usopp as he spoke up. Usopp, says Luffy, getting his attention as he continued. Today is the day you find your will. Here it may be where the fear finally fades and you take your first step to being a brave warrior, so try to calm your nerves a bit, says Luffy calmly as Usopp thought on the words and did so as the smell of fear calmed a bit. So for the next few minutes they waited, as finally the Black Cat pirate ship docked on the shore. A large group of pirates came off the ship and started running towards the village, but stopped when they saw Luffy and the others, standing and waiting at the top of the slope. One of the pirates turned to a man who Luffy had remembered to be Django and spoke. Sir, there's a bunch of kids here. I thought you said no one would know we were here, says the crew member, causing Django to look up the slope. He looked at everyone there at the top of the slope, and when his eyes landed on Luffy's straw hat and the onyx black mask, he grew immediately pale and started sweating, remembering how the crew barely made it out the last time they faced him. So he pointed at Luffy and spoke in urgency. That boy, says Django, making everyone look at Luffy as he continued. Captain Koro advised us to avoid facing him in battle, but if we don't get by him, we'll have to deal with the captain's wrath personally, says Django in a bit of a scared tone before clearing his throat and yelled out an order to his crew. Men! Kill them before the captain gets here and becomes angry, says Django yelling. Luffy looked at Zoro and nodded, causing him to unsheath his swords, as did Luffy when he took out Elemental Sun Breather. I'll use one attack to just incapacitate them and let Zoro defeat the rest. No point in senseless killing if I can help it, thought Luffy as he positioned his sword for a slash. Breath of the Moon, First Form, Dark Moon Evening Palace, says Luffy as he sent numerous chaotic crescent-shaped blades originate from the slash at the enemy crew, effectively cutting them enough to incapacitate them but not kill. This caused Usopp to get stars in his eyes while aiming at his share of the enemy. Nami was thinking about something at the moment when she saw this. Zoro's attention was caught by this as well. Such a powerful sword style. And in one slash, thought Zoro as he started cutting down pirates at the center, left, and right. Meanwhile Usopp was whispering something about the two being so cool as he started taking down his share of the enemy. Luffy took notice of Usopp as it seemed he was finally losing the fear, but it would take more than one situation for it to fully go away. Django saw this all transpiring before him. His men were dropping like flies and it was obvious that they could lose. So he turned to the ship and yelled out for two people. Sham! Butchie, get out here and handle this now, says Django, yelling with two other pirates coming from the ship. Django ordered them to then attack Zoro and after him, Luffy. This caused them to look at Zoro and Luffy in fear but reluctantly attacked their first target all the same. As they fought it seemed like their demeanor changed to one of being confident as it showed they were only acting scared. Let's see how you do, Zoro, thought Luffy as he watched his first mate battle the two. Luffy continued to watch as Zoro got two of his swords taken away from him and causing him to go into defense. So while this happened, Luffy then looked towards Usopp and Nami and spoke. Usopp, Nami, I want you to go get Zoro's swords back for him or else he might not win, says Luffy, making Nami look in fear as Usopp was keeping his nerve as best as he could in the situation. The both of them ran down the hill towards where Zoro's two swords were at. Just as they were about to reach the swords, Django intercepted them and held out a metal ring with a string. So Django then tried to hypnotize the both of them, only to be hit across the face by Nami's staff and used said staff to fling Zoro's other two swords over to him. Once that was done, Usopp and Nami decided to fight Django. Luffy watched as Zoro got both of his swords back and continued to fight his two opponents and go on the offensive, while struggling a bit against the tag team of two he was fighting. Luffy watched as Butchie was about to attack Zoro from behind while he was fighting Sham. So he decided to get involved by body flickering over in front of Butchie before he could land the attack. Hito, Asura's three-armed pistol, says Luffy, creating two other arms to make three as they all became metallic. Luffy then launched them at Butchie, hitting dead on target to send him flying into the slope, and then crashing into their ship's figurehead and then a path to the ship's cabin. Scars on the back are a swordsman's shame and resorting to attacking from the back is quite rude, says Luffy as he looked back up the slope to see a very angry Kuro standing there, which caused Luffy to smirk a bit at this. What the hell is going on here, asks Kuro yelling, which caused everyone to stop fighting and looked at him. The Black Cat pirates looked very scared now at the sight of their captain. Django looked ready to run as he spoke. Captain Kuro, these kids. They beat us, I don't understand it, they're monsters, says Django yelling out while making Kuro look at everyone with a pissed off look on his face as his anger was not able to be kept hidden behind a calm facade. When his eyes landed on Luffy, he just smirked as all he could do was look at him with pure hatred. So from there he reached into his bag that he carried with him and pulled out a pair of black furred gloves with full-length katana blades at the end of each finger. Luffy saw this to activate his haki and looked to Zoro as he spoke. Finish up, you fight Zoro, and get off the slope. I have a cat to fight, says Luffy, being serious. While this happened, Kuro looked at his subordinate Django and spoke in a tone of death. You have under 5 minutes to clean up the damage they've caused, Django, or else I'll kill you, says Kuro as he put on his gloves. Luffy decided to help Nami out with Django while leaving Zoro to finish off his opponent, Sham. When Luffy reached the bottom a few feet near Django, the man didn't know who to fear more. Kuro or the former Marine, who just grew 3 arms and punched one of his crewmates away without an issue. So Django immediately tried to go after Luffy. Before he could even react, Luffy was already behind him and gave him a haki-enhanced chop to the neck, effectively making him pass out as Luffy looked over to Nami. Why don't you search them for everything they have, Nami, says Luffy, causing her to smile and get to work on the fallen members and then work her way to the ship with Usopp helping her. Luffy looked to where Zoro was and saw that he finished his battle and was walking towards Luffy. Kuro looked very pissed off and displeased. He couldn't believe that a group of kids had caused all of this in such a short time to make all of his plans crumble. 3 years of careful planning, now gone, and it was thanks to the group in front of him. He looked at Luffy and his crew with a murderous expression in his eyes before taking off in speed towards them. He was moving too fast for Zoro to track, but Luffy could see his every move due to training his regular eyesight and not being reliant on haki. So Luffy then took off after Kuro in speed that rivaled his own, and intercepted him in the middle of the slope with his 3 fists buried into his stomach, causing him to fall over on all fours and spit up some of his food while gasping for air as he spoke. Why, asks Kuro on the ground, making Luffy look at him as he continued. Why are you getting involved, asks Kuro. Luffy sighed and spoke. Well, for one, I owe a debt, and as for why entirely, well, I don't like the fact that you would try to kill a girl who's trusted you her entire life for her fortune and then spill blood in the village of innocent people. So killing you wouldn't be worth it, but I'll give you something to remember if you ever return, says Luffy, raising his left hand to grow 2 more as they all got metallic and were coated in lightning haki. Hito, Asura's 3-armed lightning pistol, says Luffy, sending the stretched metallic arms of lightning towards Kuro's face. The force behind the punch ultimately sent him back into the wall of the slope as rocks crumbled around him a bit, showing he was going in and out of unconsciousness. Usopp, Zoro, and Nami had their jaws dropped at what just occurred. Luffy just stared at Kuro's unconscious form with an impassive look on his face and spoke. Is that all it? Asks Luffy as Django was conscious again and he spoke. What are you? Asks Django. As Luffy looked toward him and spoke. A walking calamity, says Luffy as Kuro was having a hard time getting up and spoke. My plans won't fail, says Kuro, having a hard time keeping his balance to stand as Luffy observed. I thought he would stay down after that, says Luffy, seeing him. I'll kill you for this straw hat. I don't care if you're a former Marine. You and your little band will die here, right now, and then Kaya will die, says Kuro, yelling while never noticing a teary-eyed Kaya watching from atop the slope. Luffy sighed and spoke again. Well, I'm finishing this, says Luffy, who opened his eyes again and showed hockey-colored eyes as he then used a telepathic attack. Telepathy-style hockey, lightning shock, thought Luffy, locking his eyes on Koro and making the man become electrocuted by lightning to ultimately fall, now unconscious, and effectively finishing this little fight. Koro's crew was starting to wake up, and the ones who were already awake noticed that Luffy finished their captain off without even touching him. The ones Zoro handled in his fight were also coming to as well, making Luffy realize that Zoro didn't kill them. He defeated him with electricity just looking at him, asks one of the frightened members of the Black Cat Pirates as Luffy turned his attention to them and spoke. I highly suggest getting your captain off this island, and that weird guy with the rings too. Before I change my mind about leaving you alive and kill you all. Never come back to this island again or face the consequences, says Luffy, being serious. This makes the crew scatter to grab their captain and other crew members before getting on the ship and sailing away, not wanting to fight Luffy. After a few minutes, they were finally gone as Luffy had put away his katana and deactivated his haki and smiled a bit. He then walked over to Kaya and spoke to her with a smile. Miss Kaya, how about I treat you and everyone else to breakfast? You had a pretty rough start to your day, so how about it, asks Luffy as Kaya nodded and spoke. I just can't believe Klahadore no Kuro was trying to kill me. Usopp tried to warn me and I didn't listen, says Kaya, sad now as her and the others walked back to town as Nami had all the treasure they had with Usopp's help. Well, don't mind it at all, he was trying to hurt you, so don't feel sad for people like that. Just thank Usopp for warning you early even though you didn't believe him at first, says Luffy. Kaya nodded as Luffy spoke again. Now, I'm starving. Let's get breakfast, says Luffy, being enthusiastic as they all left for the village. One day later. Luffy had permission to look through Kuro's things in the mansion and couldn't find anything interesting so far. This is crazy. Even though the man was undercover, he should have found something interesting in his time, thought Luffy. For the next few minutes he was searching the room and desk he studied at but found nothing. So he worked his way over to some boxes and started opening, to search them while moving them. This caused something to fall from it, catching Luffy's attention and finding a circular globe with red cubes and a white energy surrounding it. Hello, what's this? Thought Luffy, going to pick it up and feel a spark of energy flood his body as the world around him changed and went dark. What is this? Thought Luffy, shocked. Memory from 50 years ago. Luffy now found himself looking at 4 people in a house, a woman who was sleeping and looked tired, another walking with tea and rice balls, who was a man. The last 2, another man who was holding an infant in his arms, rocking the child to sleep. The first man walking up with the tea and rice balls, who was walking over, spoke. I poured some tea and made rice balls, says the first man cheerfully. Ah. Thank you, says the second man calmly while holding the child in his arms. Are these someone's memories? Thought Luffy, extremely shocked. Even before eating my devil fruit, I've seen fragments of a woman with white hair and others, but this is entirely different, thought Luffy, continuing to observe as the man with tea spoke again while setting the tray down to sit. Wow, fast asleep, says the first man looking at the infant as he continued. I'm sorry. My wife also happened to fall asleep, says the first man, talking about the woman who was his wife, sleeping in the house as he continued. I'm really sorry. You're a visitor, but I made you watch over my kid, says the first man, identifying the child as his kid. The man who was holding the child handed the infant over to the father as he spoke. Don't worry about it. You're a friend of the family and she's probably tired. Birthing a kid and raising them is hard work, says the second man as he took a rice ball and a cup of tea off the tray and continued speaking. After I finish eating and drinking this, I'll be on my way. I can't keep eating meals for free like this, plus I have a journey to complete, says the second man. Oh no. I owe you my life and a great gratitude. If you weren't around back then I much less my children wouldn't be here now, says the first man who was holding his son. Sip. The second did not respond as he finished the rice ball and sipped the tea. The first looked a bit concerned. As this happened, Luffy came over to look at their faces as they spoke. While noticing the second man had a bit of resemblance to himself but not as much. As he noticed, the first man began to speak again. All right then. At least tell me your story for future generations, says the first man. No need, says the second man. But, it must be hard since you have no successor at hand, says the first man as he continued. It may be impossible for me since I am a humble historian and researcher and not many read now, but one day someone will. Says the first man as the second spoke. No need, says the second man as he continued. Nico Sumiyoshi, even if I were to tell my story, it would not matter as my place in history is already assured as well as others of our time and after. Masters of their craft will always find their way to the same place, even if they change throughout time. Even if the times have changed, even if they are taken to different paths to that point, they will always go to the same place to make their story known. I believe these memories of ours will reach out to future generations of my kin called legacies, says the second man as the first known as Sumiyoshi looked on trying to understand as the second man continued. You seem to see me as a special man, some kind of special human. It may be true, but at the same time, that's not true, says the second man. What do you mean, asks the now identified Nico Sumiyoshi confused. I couldn't protect a single thing that was precious to me. My mother and father who died in a fire set on our home by our enemies, my 2 older brothers and sisters who died in battle not so long after. I may have my 4 other younger siblings, but I couldn't achieve much as I was supposed to in life, but I'll be damned if I let another fall to such pain, says the second man who stood up and walked to continue speaking. You asked to tell my story for the histories to know, well my name in those stories will be known as Progenitor D. The progenitor of a will which is destined to be stretched beyond our time, and to all those connected to the mysterious D. I will be a man who accomplishes much, but also a man of no worth, says the man identifying himself as Progenitor D, while walking away. This is the memories of, but how? Thought Luffy shocked as he was looking on at the scene before him. Don't speak like that, please. Please. I'm begging you, don't think of yourself like that old friend. Tragic. Just tragic. Thought Sumiyoshi with a bit of tears in his eyes. He was sad. Even for his friend, he was very sad. It must have been terrible for him to see a friend in such sorrow like this. Thought Luffy seeing this with a sad expression as the area around him went black again and reformed forward. Play Naruto Shippuden OSTI experienced many battles. Many years later now, Progenitor D is standing with Sumiyoshi again at a nearby dock with what could be assumed as a small kingdom's capital city wall behind the progenitor, and Sumiyoshi looking ready to leave as he spoke. So you're setting sail with your family, and others who want to go with you, asks Progenitor D. Yes, me and a few others want to find a place to settle on where we can record history to the end of time. You've already set a place like that already in your own country, so we'll send each other information to record, says Sumiyoshi informing his friend. When you find that place, contact me so that my people can help, says Progenitor D, with a smile. Right, says Sumiyoshi coming forth to give a brotherly hug. This isn't goodbye, old friend, says Sumiyoshi. No it's not but farewell, says Progenitor as Sumiyoshi walks off to the boat. We'll explore the world and record as much as we can, I've seen it already, thought Progenitor D, as he walked away. The area went black again and Luffy could hear the sound of wind as he heard a voice. This will has transcended time immemorial to reach you and other carriers, so never abandon it as some have done so already. Never abandon it and always stride with pride, we are counting on you, Monkey D. Luffy, says the voice reaching out to him. And OST. Luffy himself looked for where it originated and found nothing to soon find himself back in Koro's former room in the mansion. This wasn't just because of my devil fruit but the D in my name, thought Luffy as he noticed something about himself. He tried to activate the Logia piece of his devil and noticed that the arm turned to red cubes and disassembled. This in turn shocked him as he could now understand the fruit he possesses. I understand now. The fruit isn't just absorbing devil fruit energy, it takes the stronger abilities to replace the weaker ones, but what happens to the ones that are replaced, thought Luffy. No matter, what does matter is that I now have the full properties of the Bunkai no Mi for Logia powers, considering in the past I could only use the properties for 2 minutes straight and I would have to wait for a cooldown of sorts, but it seems as if the Sugi no Mi was fully replaced entirely. The question is, if I come into certain devil fruit users, will I be able to see pieces of the past? Maybe so. I'll write this down in my logbook later, but it seems like an even greater mystery to me, thought Luffy leaving the room. 4 days later. Luffy and the crew were currently standing on the southern shore of the island staring at their ship. The Going Merry had her cannons upgraded, the figurehead was repainted and a lot of wood on the ship was replaced making her stronger than what she was previously. Luffy and the crew were in the middle of saying their goodbyes to Kaya and Merry when they heard someone scream behind them. They all looked up to see Usopp coming down the hill, tumbling down with a big bag. Someone stop me, says Usopp yelling out as Luffy and Zoro stuck out the foot and planted it on the overly large bag, effectively stopping Usopp as he spoke. Thanks, says Usopp as he fell face first onto the ground. Don't mention it, says Luffy and Zoro as Usopp dusted himself off. He then went over to Kaya and told her he was setting out to sea like his father to become a brave warrior. Luffy looked on with a chuckle as he and Zoro boarded the ship. So when Luffy was at the railing, he leaned over and spoke out to Usopp. So Usopp, are you going to join my crew, asks Luffy. Usopp looked up at him and placed his finger on his chin and thought for a while before he replied. I will happily join your crew as your captain, says Usopp proclaiming proudly as he made Kaya giggle at his behavior. Try again, Usopp, says Luffy sighing with deadpan in his voice. As your vice captain, says Usopp proclaiming once more. Zoro's already first mate, however, I still do need a sniper on my crew, says Luffy. Usopp smiled before he shouted out. Yash! I'll be your head sniper, says Usopp yelling while making the others sweat drop. Alright Usopp, now put this on your right ring finger, says Luffy, who took out a ring and flicked it toward Usopp, who caught it. Observing the ring, he found that it had a brown background but had the kanji for marksman, ite. Usopp looked at Luffy, who spoke again. You'll understand soon enough, just put it on, hurry and get on, says Luffy. Usopp put the ring on and boarded the ship and placed his things away. Luffy then went to his captain's quarters and started putting his effects in place and took everything else out he had on the island he hid with his money. After that was done, Luffy had Zoro place the food and sake in storage while he himself handled the money. While Usopp was checking weapon inventory, so on his way back to the captain's quarters, Luffy then dropped a book and a suitcase, getting everyone's attention as he picked them both up. What's in the book and suitcase, Luffy? Asks Nami as Luffy was walking away. Nothing you need to worry about, just things of my own, says Luffy, walking away as he went into the captain's quarters and locked the door. Zoro and Usopp just went back to what they were doing, not giving it much thought. Nami, however, stared at the door a bit and had a determined look on her face while in thought. Whatever it is, it must be very valuable. I'll take it soon enough, thought Nami, walking away. With Luffy. Luffy was currently inside the captain's quarters and thought out loud. It's better to not have things laying around in here. I still don't trust Nami, so Asura's inventory, says Luffy as his right hand made the items get dragged in with all of his valuables inside now. When this was done, he sat down in the chair and looked around the room and pulled out a bottle of sake to drink from the bottle. Well, let the adventure begin, says Luffy, enjoying the drink as the ship sailed. Chapter 6, The Cooks of the Sea, Old Friends, and a Talk in the Night. Dream. Luffy is currently dreaming right now in his sleep. So in the dream, a woman with white hair and blue eyes could be seen, but from the perspective of the child it was blurry, as another was standing next to the woman not too far away and looking down at the child. As said child was reaching out to her, the woman spoke with a chuckle and what could be seen as content smile. Luffy, my sweet baby boy, says the woman with a smile. As it all goes black once again. End dream. Luffy woke up sweating and breathing heavily as he was thinking about the dream. It's been the same dream since I turned 5. Sometimes it's different dreams, but who or she could it be? Thought Luffy as he had a bit of a sad expression as he felt tears at his eyes and wiped them, proof of Luffy crying a bit in his sleep. Mother. Thought Luffy as he was up now and decided to train now, before everyone else got up. Later that morning, Luffy and his crew were sailing on the Going Merry, making their way across the sea towards the floating restaurant called the Baratai. As it was rumored to have fighting chefs, and in Luffy's mind that's exactly what he needed. It was also due to the fact that when Usopp was testing out the cannons on some rock formations, he almost hit 2 people who were named Johnny and Yasaku, who had known Zoro from the past in his bounty hunting days. So Luffy and the crew helped them out when Yasaku was suffering from scurvy, and Johnny suggested that they head to the Baratai, with him later finding out that this was the crew's plan. So now, Luffy was currently sitting on the railing at the stairway now, writing in his logbook. He noticed that Zoro was training with Johnny and Yasaku near Zoro, speaking with each other. Usopp was standing not too far from Luffy while getting another one of the cannons ready, and Nami was near the railing looking at some wanted posters as Luffy made a note to watch her. So after noticing them, Luffy looked up on the main mast of the ship and smiled a bit at the sight of his pirate flag with a Jolly Roger he created, flying proudly in the wind. His Jolly Roger was a depiction of a traditional skull with the crossbones being replaced with 2 flaming katanas, with the skull wearing Luffy's trademark straw hat. It also had Luffy's flame pattern scars on the skull but had 2 crimson dragons on each side of the crossbones, from left to right. Luffy had Usopp do the paint job for it and on the sails of the ship to strike fear into enemies at a distance. So Luffy saw a marine ship up ahead and turned to Usopp. Usopp, is it ready? Asks Luffy. Usopp gave a wide smile and replied. Yes, it's all set, says Usopp, informing Luffy. Good. Be prepared to fire one of the cannons, says Luffy as he turned his head towards Zoro. How much food do we have left, Zoro? Asks Luffy. Zoro did the math in his head, considering he did inventory earlier in the morning. We have about 2 days worth of food left, says Zoro. Luffy nodded and spoke again. Good, because we should be able to reach the Baratai in a few hours if the wind keeps up, says Luffy, getting up and going over to Johnny. Johnny, you've been to the Baratai before, right? How is it? Asks Luffy. Johnny nodded and spoke. Yes, I have. The food there is to die for. However, lately I've been hearing rumors about a certain hawk-eyed man showing up there, says Johnny while looking towards Zoro. The moment Luffy and Zoro heard this, they both smiled a bit. Luffy's smile was less noticeable compared to Zoro's. They were taken out of this when Johnny asked a question. Luffy, those flame pattern scars on your face, what are they? And do they have a story behind them? Asks Johnny. Luffy took a moment to find a way to start off and then responded. Yes, these marks are actually what you call a demon slayer mark. It's something that awakens in my family in certain generations. Actually, it said once one person has that mark on them, it starts spreading to the others as if they're resonating. That's what my gramps told me, but anyway. If it does spread to another one of you guys, I'll tell you more about it, says Luffy as everyone was paying attention to that. They were taken out of their conversation by the sound of a loud horn and the sound of bells ringing, coming off the starboard side of the ship. Every looked over to see a marine ship. Right on time, thought Luffy as he used observation haki see a bit into the future. So the ship was coming up beside them, causing all of their eyes to widen a bit except Luffy at the fact that Marine snuck up on them easily. Luffy got up from the barrel he sat on when talking to Johnny and walked towards the main deck of the ship before he jumped on the rail and stood staring at the Marines with Zoro by his side along with Usopp, as the Marine captain spoke. I have never seen that pirate flag before, says the pink-haired Marine who was in charge as he walked over to the railing of the ship. I am Marine Lieutenant Iron Fist Full Body, but you can call me sir, says the man identifying himself as Full Body, as he stared Luffy and noticed the mask strapped to Luffy's shoulder. As for Luffy, he could tell he was one of those Marines who were too cocky for their own good and weren't doing their job right or not taking their career seriously. So Luffy decided to speak. I don't recall ever asking for your name, Marine, says Luffy as he gained an emotionless look and tone. Full Body for his part was clearly pissed off by Luffy's comment, so he clenched his fist and slammed it on one of the rails of the Marine ship, cracking it just a bit before he yelled at Luffy. Just who in the hell do you think you are, punk? Asks Full Body yelling. Monkey D. Luffy, former Marine and the captain of this ship, says Luffy informing the man. Then why is it that I don't recognize your flag? Asks Full Body. Luffy sighed this time and replied. Well, maybe it's because we put it there yesterday, but you should have came to that conclusion, says Luffy putting a hand on his katana, elemental sun breather, as Full Body got a cocky smirk before he began to chuckle and speak. Is it? Asked Full Body in a condescending tone. Full Body was about to speak again but noticed something that caught his attention. He looked over and saw two others on the ship near the main cabin, who were not even bothering to hide, and saw Johnny and Yasaku. You too. You're that bounty hunting duo that goes after the small fish, says Full Body in mocking tone as a beautiful woman in a red dress walked over out from behind him and spoke to him. Come on babe, let's go to the restaurant, says the woman latched onto Full Body's arm. Full Body looked over and nodded before he turned back to Luffy and the crew and began walking away. As he was walking away, Johnny jumped forward and pulled out the latest roll of wanted posters and threw it in the air and screamed. Do you think small-time bounty hunters will go after these guys? Says Johnny yelling out, as all the wanted posters scattered all over the ship. Nami catches some of them and her eyes widen on one in particular. Luffy caught that but also realized something else, as did Zoro and Usopp. You're gonna say that after we let you stay on the ship, thought Luffy, Zoro, and Usopp with a sweat drop. Full Body paid no attention to him and instead, he looked over to his subordinates and gave out an order before leaving. They're an eyesore, sink the ship, says Full Body walking away as the Marine saluted. The Marines aimed one of their cannons right at Luffy, causing him to not look worried at all as he decided to use his free right hand while the left was on his katana. They're pointing the cannon right at us. Luffy, what do you want to do? Asks Usopp, yelling the last bit worried and a bit scared. Don't worry, I got it, says Luffy, causing them all to look at Luffy to see what he was going to do, as Luffy spoke again. You may panic right now, but try to keep a cool head sometimes, says Luffy being nonchalant. And without warning, the Marines on their ship fired one of their cannons right at Luffy. For Luffy's part, he just stood there and stared at the incoming cannonball before he stuck out his hand and caught the cannonball with ease, causing all the Marines, Zoro, Usopp, Nami, Johnny, and Yasaku eyes to widen. Well, that wasn't very nice, but I can't blame you. As you can't come over here yourself and face me, says Luffy calmly as he pulled his arm back to throw it. Genkatsu Meteor, says Luffy, letting it go freely, as it hits dead on with the impact being more powerful than when being fired from an actual cannon. The throw hit the main mast and exploded, destroying it and a large part of the deck, while also sending Marines flying back. Johnny and Yasaku stared at the scene with their jaws dropped. They had never seen anything like this before. They heard stories about people with devil fruits and strength beyond a normal person and average person, but they never actually saw someone with this kind of power. As Luffy had already told them, he had a devil fruit and one of the most powerful ones at that. Full Body, who was already off the ship and on a small dinghy with the woman and two Marines, had quickly ordered his subordinates to turn around after they heard the explosions on their ship. Luffy had hopped the railing and pulled out his first katana and said one word as he took a slash in the direction of the Marine ship. Lacerates, says Luffy as the slash he took comes onto the ship and splits it in half. He split it in half with just one stroke of the blade. Just what kind of sword style does he use? Thought Zoro calmly, seeing the power behind that. Luffy put the katana back in the sheath and started to walk as Johnny spoke. Wow, big bro Luffy, you took out a navy ship with just 2 moves, says Johnny as he and Yasaku looked at Luffy but also looked at the burning marine ship as Luffy spoke. They're just fortunate enough that I didn't completely destroy it to the point where there was nothing left, says Luffy as he turns to his crew as he spoke again. I'm hungry, so let's go eat. Nami, how long until we're at the Baratai? Asks Luffy. Nami thought for a moment before coming to an answer. In about an hour or so, says Nami as Luffy nodded while noticing the wanted poster in her hand as she turned her body back towards the railing while looking at the poster. Luffy looked at her a bit more with narrowed eyes as he did notice the person on the wanted poster in her hand, causing Luffy to think for a moment. Just what are you hiding? And what's your game? Thought Luffy as he went over to Zoro and whispered in his ear while passing him. Keep an eye on Nami for me when I'm not looking. She's up to something, and I plan to know what it is, says Luffy whispering while walking past as Zoro nodded and the crew traveled to their destination. Baratai. The crew had finally reached the Baratai in an hour's time just like Nami said and started to disembark. As they came up to the doors of the restaurant, Luffy shoved the 2 large doors open. When the doors opened, everyone in the restaurant stopped what they were doing and turned to look at Luffy and his crew, with one keeping their eye on Luffy in particular. It was obvious that they were pirates, and it was even more obvious who their captain was based on how Luffy was dressed and the aura of power that came off him. Luffy noticed a few women in the restaurant were looking at him with blushes on their faces, but one did catch his eye and another figure watching him as well. Luffy saw a man walking up to them holding a silver platter. He is an average-sized, muscular man with a lot of hair on his arms and legs. He has a shaved head, large lips, and a short black beard. He wears a navy blue short-sleeved shirt with yellow buttons on both sides and light blue on the end of the sleeves. He has knee-length shorts that are the same color as his shirt, along with brown shoes. He also wears a white apron, a pink ascot, an earring in his right ear, and a white rope tied around his head. He has 2 heart tattoos on his left arm. So when the man reached them, he spoke out. Hello and welcome to the Baratai, my name is Patty and may I ask how you will be paying for your meal, asks the man identified as Patty, causing Luffy to answer. With money of course, says Luffy being blunt and to the point. Patty put on a smile that even Luffy knew was fake to be replaced with a real one as the man spoke again. Well then, allow me to escort you to your table, says Patty, leading Luffy and the crew to an empty table. Luffy saw the table set up to speak out once more. Can you put 2 more seats here, asks Luffy, which makes the others wonder why as Patty spoke. Certainly, says Patty as 2 others cooks come over to put 2 more seats there as Luffy and his crew sit. Your waiter will be with you in a moment to take your order, says Patty as he put down menus for the crew and 2 more for the other empty seats. Luffy nodded in acknowledgement before looking through the menu for what he wanted. 10 minutes later, a blonde-haired man wearing a black suit came over to the table and spoke. Hello, my name is Sanji. I am the sous chef here but will be acting as your waiter for today, says the man identified as Sanji with a cigarette in his mouth. So, what will you have, asks Sanji as Luffy spoke first. I'll have a bowl of rice porridge, the popular way with pork and century egg, if you have it with a bottle of rum and a platter of meat to share with another. As for the other who is absent at the moment, it will be salmon with daikon, says Luffy as Sanji nodded and started taking the others' orders. An hour later. Luffy and the crew were now waiting for the order to be completed, as their waiter known as Sanji brought out appetizers and wine for them to wait. So right now, all was good as they made conversation the entire time, but it was interrupted as the doors were suddenly shoved open again, gaining the attention of everyone that was in there again. Everyone looked to see a very pissed off full body, standing there breathing heavily while soaked and giving Luffy a death stare. Luffy just looked at him in a glance, before he went back to taking a sip of his water, as he preferred it over wine at the moment. Full body saw this and it pissed him off even more. He stomped over into the restaurant, making a beeline straight for Luffy's table. The people in the restaurant along with Luffy's crew began to get nervous while Zoro placed his hand on his swords and Usopp on his slingshot, getting ready to fight for their captain. When Full Body reached Luffy, he stood on the right side of Luffy while staring down at him as the pirate captain took a sip of his water, being calm all the same and showing no change because of the man's anger. Just who do you think you are? Because of you, my men are either dead or seriously wounded and my ship is utterly destroyed, says Full Body, yelling, making everyone in the restaurant hear this. Luffy himself didn't even look in his direction as he spoke. Well, maybe you shouldn't have attacked me and try to show off for the woman that was with you, says Luffy calmly. Full Body was entirely pissed off by the way Luffy dismissed him as though he were nobody and not a threat. He wasn't high up but was a Marine lieutenant from Marine headquarters, that for sure was known. Full Body then proceeded to slam his fist on the table angry and then picked up the water picture, as Luffy knew what he was going to do already. Do you have any idea who I am? Asks Full Body angry as Luffy's eyes glowed a beautiful red with a gold ring that matched the color of the sun at the middle of the irises. This color change in Luffy's eyes happened whenever he was using haki or a higher state of it, but here, he was using observation haki to look into the future for a few seconds as he spoke. A man who's going to be thrown out of here in the next few seconds by a blonde waiter, says Luffy. His full body had a questionable look at that as Luffy continued. But to answer your question, the answer is no. I don't, because if you're not Cypher Pole, a Marine Admiral or someone high up that can face me, then you're nobody to me, at best an eyesore, says Luffy bluntly. As this was said, Sanji came back over to see what was causing the commotion as he spoke out. Is there a problem over here, mister? Asks Sanji, who came back over. Luffy looked over to him and spoke. Yes, there is. This one is bothering me and my party as we wait for our food, says Luffy, informing the blonde. I don't give a rat's ass if you're waiting or not, says Full Body, trying to splash Luffy with the picture but found the water not coming out and just stood there inside the picture, which confused him greatly along with everyone else, as Sanji came and grabbed the man's wrist. Sanji then took this time to kick Full Body in the abdomen, which sent him a bit away but still on his feet. In speed, Sanji performed an amazing spinning heel kick that connected to Full Body's face and sent him flying across the restaurant, as his head was spinning from the force of the attack. As Sanji was taking care of Full Body, Luffy turned to Zoro and spoke. I think we found our cook of the ship along with 2 others that are here, says Luffy, causing Zoro to raise a brow at that and speak his mind. Why does it have to be him? He seems a bit strange, says Zoro, giving his assessment. Say the guy with 3 swords and has no sense of direction, says Luffy with a blank and deadpan look. That doesn't matter, says Zoro with shark teeth, looking offended as he calmed down to speak again. What did you mean by 2 others, by the way? Asks Zoro, curious. Some old acquaintances. I think you'll like the first one considering he can spar with you, says Luffy as Zoro gets a smirk and nods. While their conversation ended, Sanji and Patty along with 2 other chefs were beating Full Body into the ground as they got near the door. Full Body himself went from angry to being badly humiliated as he reached the door. Someone came in to show it was a Marine who survived the sinking ship. Lieutenant Full Body. We have a problem. The prisoner we had from Krieg's crew escaped, says the Marine, making Full Body widen his eyes and stand up but struggling all the same as he spoke. Damn it all. It must have been the chaos that caused it, but he should be weak due to hunger, says Full Body as he leaves out the door with the Marine at his side. Come on, we have to find him now, says Full Body. Yes sir, says the Marine as the door closes. Luffy for his part saw that everyone around the restaurant was in a panic at the mention of Krieg's name. So he took it as something that wasn't that much of a threat to him. As another 10 minutes passed, Sanji came over and apologized for the wait as Luffy said they were only doing their job and understood that they can't rush food. After this, the doors opened again and showed some guy dragging himself in. Looking on the verge of death while breathing a bit hard, Luffy recognized him as Jin from a wanted poster. Jin is a relatively thin man with short, scruffy hair, a scruffy beard, and a slight mustache. He has dark circles under his eyes, as though he lacks sleep. Jin wears an open white jacket with a red sea serpent design on each side with a green shirt underneath, gray pants matching with his jacket, a gray headband with blue stripes design, and 2 spherical earrings on each ear. So the man was dragging himself in as he spoke. Food. Anything you have, I don't care, just bring me something I can eat, says Jin, causing Patty to walk over to him and speak. Hello and welcome to the Baratai, you damn crook. May I ask how you'll be paying, asks Patty. Jin looked up to the man and spoke. Would bullets be enough to pay, asks Jin in a tone of hunger and death. Patty just looked on a bit as he sighed and spoke. So, you don't have actual money then, eh? Asks Patty before he slammed his fist into Jin's head while breaking the floor a bit. Even if you are a pirate, we only take paying customers and bullets is not a way to pay, says Patty as 2 other chefs came over and picked the pirate up to take him and throw him out at the back of the resultant. Luffy looked on with a frown as he remembered what it can be like on missions when you can't eat all the time, but also noticed that Sanji had left to go back into the kitchen. Luffy turned towards his party and spoke as he got up. You guys wait for the food, I'll be back, says Luffy as he headed out to find Jin. Outside. Luffy went towards the back door, for which he assumed was for customers when they wanted to smoke outside. So when he did open the door leading out the back, that was most likely used for a smoke area or just to enjoy the breeze, he saw that the pirate was laying on the ground, hunched over while holding his stomach. Luffy got on the rail and got in a squat position as his arms were resting on the knees and he spoke. Your name is Jin, correct? Asks Luffy, getting the man's attention. The pirate looked up from the ground and stared at Luffy and was about to speak, but before he could, a plate was placed in front of him with a glass of water. Jin looked to see that it was Sanji standing there with a cigarette in his mouth, lighting it as he spoke. Eat, says Sanji as he moved near the railing next to Luffy. Jin began to grit his teeth a bit and spoke. I won't accept your charity, damn it, says Jin, pushing the plate away. Sanji for his part sighed a bit before he looked at the man and spoke. Shut up and just eat. To me, any hungry person's a customer, says Sanji. I can't pay for it, says Jin as his stomach growls a bit. The vast ocean can be cruel. It's awful to not have any food or water. Just awful. I understand starving people more than anyone, maybe the same as this guy, says Sanji referring to Luffy as he was in thought, so Sanji just continued while looking at Jin. I don't care if you want to die with dignity. But if you eat up, you'd be able to look forward to a new tomorrow, won't you? Asks Sanji. Definitely the guy I'm looking for to be a part of my crew, thought Luffy with pride watching with a neutral face. Jin had finally given in and had eaten the food. Luffy just stood there giving the man his time to eat. So when Jin finished he spoke. You forgot to answer my question by the way, says Luffy being calm. Forgive me, my name is Jin, well better known as Jin the Man Demon. I am the combat commander and right hand of Admiral Don Krieg, says Jin as Luffy nodded his head. Right. Never heard of him, says Luffy considering he only saw Jin's wanted poster this morning. Sanji and Jin's eyes widen at that. What the hell you mean by that? Asks Sanji yelling as he earned a nod from Jin. Luffy sighed and shrugged a bit as he spoke. It's just like I said before, I never heard of him. But I have heard of Jin because I saw his wanted poster this morning, says Luffy earning a nod from Jin but a disbelieving look from Sanji as Luffy spoke again. If I remember correctly, your name's Sanji, right? Asks Luffy as Sanji nodded. Good, I wanted to ask if you want to join my crew. I could use a cook like yourself on the open sea, says Luffy, which surprises Sanji. While this happened, Jin turned to Sanji and spoke. As interesting as the offer is, I'll have to refuse. I have a debt with the old geezer who owns the place that I can't ever repay in money, says Sanji. Luffy looked on for a moment and nodded as he spoke to Sanji again. I see. Well, I refuse your refusal, says Luffy, making Sanji's jaw drop while he got a tick mark from the blank look on Luffy's face. Before Sanji could even respond, Jin spoke again, and before Sanji could. By any chance, are you a pirate? Asks Jin as Luffy nodded. And what are your dreams, if you don't mind me asking? Asks Jin. This was earning a confused look from Sanji as he was wondering where he was going with all this. Unite my scattered clan and become leader of it, return to my ancestral homeland to see it, conquer the Grand Line, find the One Piece and become king of the pirates, says Luffy with a calm look on his face as the wind blew a bit. I see, then let me give you some advice as someone who has been to the Grand Line, says Jin, earning a raised eyebrow from Luffy and a curious look from Sanji as Jin continued. Stay away from that place. Our entire fleet of ships went in there and on the 7th day, our same fleet was destroyed by one man, says Jin, surprising Sanji and causing Luffy to chuckle a bit. That just means your crew was too weak to survive paradise. I've been all over the North, South, East, and West Blue, hell even the Red Line, and nothing has fascinated me more than the Grand Line and what it can offer. It doesn't matter how large your numbers or how many ships you have. Only the strong can survive, and I know that because I am from the Grand Line, says Luffy, making both of their jaws drop. Luffy had found out from his father that he was originally born in the Grand Line and was brought to East Blue to be raised there by Garp. As his father never told him where exactly he was born at, and it pissed him off a bit. So after the two heard this from Luffy, Jin spoke up. You're from the Grand Line? Asks Jin, for which Luffy nodded as the man continued. I see, I guess you will be more prepared than we ever will be, says Jin, a bit sad as he turned to Sanji before he decided to take his leave. Thank you, Sanji. For the food, says Jin as he walked away to leave while Luffy looked at Sanji. I won't be leaving here until you join my crew, Sanji, says Luffy. Sanji didn't want to respond and walked back into the restaurant. Luffy sighed at this, but not before speaking once again. You know, it's quite rude not to show yourselves openly, Ju and Lily, says Luffy as two people jumped down and Luffy brought his head up to look at them. Long time no see, says Luffy with a grin. Yeah, after the incident you caused and we having had to participate in what happened afterwards, I'm not that thrilled, says Ju with a serious expression as he spoke again. But it is good to see you again, says Ju with a small smirk. The first person standing before Luffy was known as Maristiyaju, the 17-year-old pillar general of water. Known as Dead Calm Ju and the young man who possessed the Mizu Mizu no Mi. Ju is a tall, young man with medium-length, messy black hair tied back into a low ponytail and dark blue eyes. He wears a red shirt with some black pants and a haori with two different patterns, one solid red and one geometrically patterned with green, orange, and yellow, as the former belonged to his sister while the latter belonged to an old friend he called his brother. He has a katana strapped to his side as well. The two met at 9 years old when Luffy was gathering his team and he found Ju in East Blue. So now, Luffy decided to speak out again from hearing this from his old friend. Yeah, Ju, says Luffy as he looks over to Lily with a smile. It's been a while since we last saw each other, hasn't it? Asks Luffy, seeing her. It has, 3 years in fact. I heard you've been making a name for yourself as the god of the Pleasure District, or do you prefer God of Pleasure, Luffy? Asks Lily, coming up to him. Luffy responded by wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Lily is a 17-year-old giant with tan skin, long green hair tied in a ponytail and blue eyes. She wears gold hoop earrings and a red corset, as well as a red sash wrapped around her red shorts. She has thigh highs and wears brown and red boots. When she is ready to fight, she wears a horned Viking helmet. Her size is the same as Luffy's due to mastering her devil fruit the Mini no Mi, but she can take on miniature form that makes her tiny. These two met when Luffy was 12 to help get her father out of Impel Down, for which they did under certain circumstances that almost got them caught. So now Luffy spoke to her in a playful manner. Maybe both, says Luffy with a small smile as he gave her a kiss on the cheek that made her blush. You've gotten more beautiful since I last saw you, and stronger as well, considering I can sense both of your auras, says Luffy as Lily smiled. Yeah, we have, and so have the other generals who were training these past couple of years, says Ju as this got Luffy's attention. Actually, where are the other, by the way, Ju, asks Luffy. From what I heard, Gyomii, Agni, Inosuke, and Alize are somewhere in the first half, as well are Akino, Alina, and Dariari too. So we should be able to pick them up as we head towards Sabaody, says Ju as Luffy nodded. Good, well, I ordered both of your favorites and I would like to introduce you guys to the crew, says Luffy as Lily nodded with a smile while Ju turned to walk away as he spoke. I'll pass, says Ju walking away. But I ordered your favorite, salmon with daikon, says Luffy in a persuasive tone as Ju turned back around and walked towards Luffy. You have my attention, says Ju as Luffy grinned and led them back in. The day would go without any further disturbances as they all enjoyed their meals and got to know the two arrivals. Later that night. It was now night time, as the crew decided to stay the night at the Baratai and slept in there to wait for Sanji to join them. So right now, it was the dead of night as no one was up and it was quiet, except for one. Nami right now was sneaking back onto the ship quietly and not trying to be seen by anyone or risk being seen in any fashion. As she was lurking about, she had a thought. All I need to do is take this ship in the night and I'm home free, thought Nami, lurking about towards the Going Merry. The water came in calmly as Nami made it onto the ship and made her way towards the ropes holding the ship in dock, but before she could even touch the ropes, something caught her attention to also stop her in her own tracks. You know, if it were anyone else, Nami, you'd be dead by now, says Luffy with his eye color changing due to observation haki being active as Nami turned to him and was trying to make an excuse now while having a thought. Shit. How long was he on the ship? Did he know I was gonna do this, thought Nami as she put a smile on her face and spoke. Luffy. What are you talking about? I was only making sure everything on the ship is in place in terms of navigation-wise and dash, begins Nami with a smile but was cut off by Luffy. Cut the shit, because you're not a good liar, not at all. Since we sailed from Usopp's home, you've been curious about what I had in that suitcase and book which I keep with me at all times. And then earlier today, you were looking at a wanted poster with a certain look, along with the fact that right now, you're going to reach for that barrel top and hit me, which won't work, says Luffy, seeing into the future by a few seconds as Nami is shocked and does not know what to say as Luffy continued. So I'm giving you a chance now, tell me or I'll find out later on my own terms, says Luffy, giving her an ultimatum. Nami remains silent and doesn't know if she should say something or just keep it to herself. Luffy sees this and sighs while walking away and speaking. Get off the ship and go to sleep. Once we're done here and get my cook, the crew and I are going to go take down Arlong, considering where he's based at is the next island, says Luffy, making her flinch a bit as she heads off the ship behind him. Arlong's tied to this, so what did the fish bastard do to her exactly, thought Luffy, heading back to his room, and so did Nami. The night would go silent without any further disturbances, but something was coming on the horizon. Chapter 7, The Dawn, and an Old Acquaintance. The next day. The next day had rolled around right after the whole incident with Nami. Zoro was now keeping an even better eye on her now, as Luffy had informed him of what she planned last night. Yesterday Luffy got his business in order with Ju and Lily to make sure they had the rings on their right ring finger as well. Ju had a ring for the kanji of water, Mizu, and for Lily she had a ring for the kanji of her last name that stands as a testament to her epithet she got for being a glutton, and stomach, both of which Luffy gave them in the past. Luffy knew that they were definitely gonna need them for when they set sail or are separated in the future. So currently right now, Luffy and the crew were currently sitting at a table enjoying breakfast. As Zoro was talking to Ju about sparring and Lily was getting to know Nami and Usopp. Luffy for his part just looked on a bit as he drank some orange juice from his glass. All was peaceful until something caused a shadow near the windows. A customer near one of the windows got up to see what it was and paled a bit before yelling out. It's the Dreadnought Saber. Don Krieg's ship has come, say the male customer, yelling out as everyone in the restaurant is thrown into a panic except for Luffy's table as they sat there watching the chaos in the restaurant unfold and waiting to see this dawn. After a couple of minutes of panic, the doors of the restaurant are suddenly blown open, which stops the panic a bit. Jin is seen coming from the smoke holding someone slung over his shoulder, who looked on the verge of dying. Jin dragged himself and the large man into the restaurant and began to beg for food and water. "Please. Bring us some food and water," says Jin, yelling out, begging while barely able to hold up the man who Luffy assumed is Don Krieg as Jin continued. "We have money," says Jin as he pleaded to the restaurant staff. The chefs and customers were shocked to a stand, still not knowing what to make of any of this. As the only ones who weren't showing any emotion were Luffy, Zoro, Ju, Lily, Sanji, and the owner identified as Zeph. The rest of Luffy's crew was shocked as the rest of the restaurant. The next thing that happened was Krieg falling to the floor face first on the ground, which caused Jin to beg some more. Luffy noticed that Sanji heading towards the kitchen, but Patty denied him food and water as the restaurant started making comments about how much of a monster Krieg is. These idiots think the man's a monster, then what the hell would they think of what's in the Grand Line, thought Luffy. As Luffy was having this thought with Ju and Lily, who unconsciously thought the same. Don Krieg then did what no one thought he would and bowed his head and began to beg for food. Jin tried to stop his captain and asked him to raise his head, but Krieg didn't and instead continued to beg for food, even if it meant the scraps. So the next thing that was heard was from Sanji. "Get out of the way, Patty," says Sanji before kicking the man in the face and sending him aside to a nearby table. Sanji then walked forward to Krieg and Jin to place a bottle of wine and a bowl of food in front of him as he spoke again. "Here is something for your captain," says Sanji as it was there in front of Krieg. "Thank you, Sanji." "Thank you," says Jin as his captain then began to devour the food in front of him like a wild animal. One of the chefs there began to yell at Sanji to get the food away from Krieg before it was too late, but Sanji didn't, as he only stood there with a bored expression on his face. Luffy for his part was observing Krieg with some nagging feeling in his head. Something about this guy isn't right, thought Luffy as he used observation haki to see a bit into the future and saw it. Well shit, this is gonna be a mess, thought Luffy, seeing what is about to happen. Sanji stood there watching Krieg finish the food and slammed the bottle on the floor of the restaurant as he finished everything that was given to him. He then sprang up to his feet in speed to punch Sanji and send him flying. People in the restaurant started to leave in haste, not wanting to be involved in this, as the only ones left there were Luffy and his crew and the chefs of the Baratai. Ju used his devil fruit to restrain Nami from even trying to leave in the crowd and had no choice but to stay there. Luffy then saw a bit further into the future, and when he did, he developed a grin. "Well, this is a surprise," thought Luffy with the grin as he turned to Usopp and spoke. "Usopp, go move the ship to the other side of the restaurant, we're about to have a powerful guest. Knowing him, a battle will be coming shortly. One that I'll be participating in most likely," says Luffy. Usopp, Johnny, and Yasaku got up to do as Luffy said. This left only Luffy, Zoro, Lily, and Ju, with him restraining Nami with water. Krieg began to speak, gaining the attention of everyone present. "This is a pretty good ship, I'll be taking it as a part of my fleet," says Krieg with a sinister smile on his face as he continued. "As you can all see, my ship is a wreck. So naturally, I will be needing a new and nice one, from where I can rebuild my fleet. After some modifications to the ship from you all, you'll all be leaving," says Krieg. "What? Like hell that's happening," says one chef, yelling out as Krieg paid no mind to it and spoke again. "There are dozens of my crew left on my ship, exactly 100. All weak from hunger and have serious wounds. If you value your lives or what little you have left, you will prepare food and water for every last one of them," says Krieg as Patty spoke up. "You're telling us to feed the people who'll become our executioners? You're crazy if you think we're doing that." "I refuse," says Patty, yelling as Krieg spoke again. "I am not asking, I am telling you to do it," says Krieg, making the cooks tremble in fear a bit as Lily turned to Luffy, who scoffed at this man. "Aren't you going to do anything?" asks Lily. Luffy yawned a bit and responded. "Yeah, but I rather wait for our other guest who has yet to arrive," says Luffy as Lily raised an eyebrow and nodded. While this conversation happened, Ju used his devil fruit to make Nami sit in her seat as he took his seat once more, with Luffy speaking again. "Plus I'm not in a rush. I'm patient," says Luffy. Sanji then sighed, got up and announced that he would cook for them as the other cooks of the Baratai moved to stop him. Patty trying to restrain him from doing it, but then had other cooks do it for him as he went to grab something. When he came back, he was holding a large cannon, pointing it at Krieg and firing it with a meatball being sent in his direction to end this madness. The cannonball made of meat sailed forth at amazing speed as it collided with Krieg and created smoke and dust to be kicked up. The cooks thought it was over and started celebrating for Patty and their victory as it was silenced by Krieg speaking from the dust and smoke that was clearing. "You thought that was supposed to do something? Either you're brave or just stupid," says Krieg, scaring them all again. Luffy didn't look surprised as it was obvious that the man was wearing some armor from the scent he was giving off. Krieg then was shown standing in golden armor with his guns mounted on the shoulder plates, coming out to aim at Patty and the chefs and yelled. "Now die," says Krieg, yelling out as he opened fire while speaking again. "You cooks should never had defied me. I am the strongest man in the world, says Krieg, making Ju and Lily hold their laughter in as Luffy chuckled lowly a bit as they all had a thought. Is Whitebeard a joke to you? Thought the three, finding this man very funny, a bit too funny for them as Luffy spoke a bit. The strongest, huh? Asks Luffy amused. How can you be so calm about this? Damn it, says Patty, seeing this as he and Chefs were able to take cover. Luffy put his silverware down and spoke. I've faced a worse, and a long line of bastards that are stronger than him and will continue to do that in the future, so it's not really a big deal. Don't get me wrong, he's big, but I fought bigger, says Luffy as he then went back to his meal. Everyone there except Zoro, Ju, and Lily were shocked by his words, along with Usopp, Johnny, and Yasaku coming back from moving the ship while hearing what Luffy said. Krieg narrowed his eyes at Luffy a bit, about to speak, but something interrupted him from doing so, as he turned to his front to find the owner carrying a large sack towards him. Zeph then placed the large sack down in front of Krieg and spoke. This is about 100 meals. Now, take it to your men right away, says Zeph in a serious tone of voice, with his workers wondering what he's doing in some panic. Owner Zeph. What are you doing? Asks Patty with some wondering that as well. Krieg for his part heard this and picked up on the name and looked shocked. You're Redfoot Zeph of the former Coot Pirates, says Krieg lowly, with Luffy having full attention to this. Redfoot Zeph? I knew his name sounded familiar along with the files on him that I had read years back, and stories I heard, thought Luffy, surprised. Zeph walked away from Krieg and headed for a chair nearby his workers and sat down. Why did you do that? You know, if they regain their strength, they'll kill every single one of us, says a chef, yelling. Zeph took a seat and then spoke to respond and say what he had to towards Krieg, wanting to know something. That will only happen if they still have their will to fight. So tell me, after suffering such a defeat to your fleet of 50 ships, did your will survive such a devastating defeat? Asks Zeph to Krieg, which made his workers widen their eyes along with mostly everyone there. What? Says Patty, not believing that as Krieg spoke. It is you, Redfoot Zeph. So you're alive, the unrivaled cooking captain who sailed the Grand Line, says Krieg, making his assumption. Yes, I am, but what does my time as a pirate have to do with anything? Asks Zeph, for which the others wanted to know this as well. Krieg got a smirk and spoke. You're the man who sailed the treacherous water of the Grand Line and came back unharmed to tell the tale that not many could, says Krieg, causing everyone there to widen their eyes and look at Zeph in awe as Krieg continued. You should have a log detailing your tactics, time, and what you've encountered in the Grand Line, information on the journey there. Give it to me, says Krieg, demanding it and making Luffy narrow his eyes and looked annoyed with Krieg. Yes, I do have it, but I would never hand it to the likes of you. That log is the memory and pride of the crew I sailed with. Far too valuable and important to me to just hand over to you, says Zeph, making Krieg get pissed off. Luffy, Ju, and Lily could understand where Zeph was coming from with this and understood that if the men who Zeph sailed with had perished in an accident that took his leg, it was far too sacred of a treasure to let anyone have it or even give to another. Krieg then spoke again in anger. Then I'll take it from you myself, says Krieg, getting their attention once more as he continued. Yes, it's true, I was beaten by a simple drawback in the Grand Line. It doesn't mean I'm giving up on it, for I am Don Krieg. It's just another damn sea to me. I have the necessary mindset as I have enough men, weapons and power along with enough ambition. The only thing I don't have is information, the information you have, but that will all be fixed in time. Once I have your damn logbook and take this restaurant and rebuild another fleet, I'll sail into the Grand Line and take the one piece for myself, says Krieg, yelling out as his power was going a bit to his head. Everyone was silent on this, but that silence was quickly broken by laughter. As Luffy and Ju had an arm wrapped around each other's shoulders while laughing in outright entertainment from what was in front of them, along with Lily having a fit of giggles that quickly turned to straight-out laughter. So when they calmed down, Luffy began to speak. Wow, you have got to be the funniest bastard I've met and heard say something like that in a while, says Luffy, standing a bit away from Krieg, as the man was trying to recognize where he saw the boy from as he continued. You think that by taking a logbook, this ship, and rebuilding a fleet that you'll survive the Grand Line? That's a riot because a bird and fish have better chances than you, says Luffy with a now serious look on his face that became cold as ice as he continued. It doesn't matter the numbers or ships or ambition. It all means nothing in that ocean if you're weak and don't possess the will in yourself to overcome what awaits you there, and you Krieg are weak as they come. Any kind of weakness disgusts me, a weak opponent revolts me, says Luffy, making the cooks and Luffy's crew flinch except for Ju and Lily from the harsh statement while widening their eyes. Krieg forgot about trying to recognize this kid and was pissed as he spoke in anger. Who the hell do you think you are, brat? Asks Krieg, yelling in rage while asking in a dangerous tone that made some of the cooks tremble. A walking calamity, says Luffy, being short and simple as his words held meaning and power behind them as Jin spoke. Don Krieg, that's the pirate I told you about. The one who survived and is from the Grand Line, says Jin, making everyone who didn't know that widen their eyes in shock as Krieg was again trying to find out who the kid was exactly as he spoke. I mean, it's obvious. You didn't survive a week, your ships were destroyed and you were on the brink of death just a couple of minutes ago. Now you spouting bullshit about conquering the Grand Line and retrieving the One Piece. Need I go on? Asks Luffy as he began walking towards the man in a calm manner. When Luffy was in reach of Krieg, the man tried to take a punch at him with a gloved hand that had diamonds on it. Don Krieg, says Jin, trying to stop his captain. Luffy saw this and only spoke 3 words to get out of the way. Asura's Bunkai teleport, says Luffy as he disassembled into red cubes and reassembled out of the way of the punch Krieg threw at him. This shocked everyone there entirely to their core, even Ju and Lily, considering they only saw a bit of this, but they could tell he had the full properties of this ability now. What the? Says Sanji as his cigarette dropped from his mouth. Surprised, asks Luffy, not changing his calm manner in any way. Krieg brought his fist back and backed up a bit unconsciously as he had a thought. What the hell was that? What did he do? Thought Krieg as he recognized this kid, and his eyes went wide as he spoke. No. You can't be him, says Krieg, now fully scared. Asks Luffy, curious at the man standing before him that is now in fear. Don't bullshit me, you brat. I know who you are now, says Krieg, making everyone wonder what the hell he's scared of as he spoke again. You're him. The kid who destroyed an entire island in pure rage, leaving no trace of it at all. Said to be a threat to most marines, warlords, and the underworld, and for being part of the incident that took place in Mariewa known as Hot Friday for the burning of the city. Known by the nickname Ghost of the D, and the captain of the now dishonored 9 demonic Pillar Generals. Pillar General of Wrath, Monkey D. Luffy, says Krieg, shocking everyone to their core at this information except for Ju and Lily, who knew. Luffy now had part of his history out there now for those there to hear it. Many had heard of the incident in the newspaper that took place, but this was not the entire story behind what had occurred that day, and nor was it the biggest piece. Yes, you're correct, but that's only part of the story, says Luffy calmly as he spoke again. Now if we're done here, I suggest you feed your men, because the man who was hunting you will be here any moment now, says Luffy, causing Zoro to look towards the door in excitement as he continued. Shouldn't have interrupted his nap really, and you may have survived, says Luffy, walking back to his table to finish his food and orange juice. Krieg quickly got over his fear to move in haste before that man, who chased them from the Grand Line, could get here, and went over to pick up the bag so that he could feed his men, and was now walking over to the door to begin leaving for his ship. But not before saying something. In an hour I'll be back for this restaurant, and anyone still here will die, says Krieg as Luffy ignored the man. Luffy decided to look over at Zeph and speak. Mr. Zeph, I'll make a deal with you. If I beat this guy and defend this restaurant for you, you give me that chef, says Luffy, pointing towards Sanji as Zeph smiled a bit. You've got yourself a deal, kid, says Zeph, with Luffy nodding and causing Sanji to protest angrily as everyone ignored him. 1 hour later. An hour passed as everyone inside was waiting for Krieg to show up until a loud sound from outside could be heard. As the entire restaurant started rocking a bit and causing chairs to fall over. Ju turned to Luffy and spoke. So, he came here, says Ju in a matter-of-fact tone. Yes, he's here, says Luffy as he got up with his crew following him out the door along with the chefs of the place. Outside. As Luffy stepped out of the restaurant, he saw Krieg's ship sliced in half with most of the crew in disarray. The last time we saw each other was when you burned an entire marine port for ships needing repair, and before that you almost burned an entire city to the ground after the incident you caused a month prior, Luffy of the 9 demonic Pillar Generals, says the man standing on a coffin-shaped boat. Luffy replied with his flame pattern markings spreading out a bit, indicating he was activating the marks a bit as he grabbed one of his katanas. More like you tried to bring me down out of the sky, both of those times, says Luffy with eyes ablaze with hockey. The man before him was someone Luffy had a history with in terms of swordsmanship, and battles he fought after disappearing from the incident that occurred in Mariewa. So now the man spoke out again with a chuckle while being a bit amused. Yes, but it's been some time, hasn't it, asks the man again while amused. Indeed it has. I intend to repay you for what you did in full, Hawkeye my hawk, says Luffy. As a battle was about to begin and the air heavy from what was to come. And that will be the end of this part. This took a lot of time to make, so I hope you enjoyed. Only 23.1% of people who watches these videos are actually subscribed, so please hit the subscribe button and turn on post notifications so you will never miss a video. Stay tuned for the next part. Goodbye.